The reading of the gospel today is basically the sermon. That's the important. So Nastia will come down as the narrator and stand right here, and we will proclaim that famous, well-known story again. But I wanted to kind of give you some kind of pointers as we enter this very familiar story, 3 kind of pointers to observe and look at. And the first one is about we're caught between a kind of this moment of celebration that we began in the parish hall, this happy, triumphant experience, and then it ends in kind of desolation and tragedy. And it's kind of hard to hold that together. But I share with you an experience from when I was doing some work in East Africa, in Uganda, with Archbishop Yono Akoth way back in the 90s. And it was not uncommon when the Archbishop came to visit the local parish that the whole village or the town, about a quarter of a mile away from the church, would have a kind of formal meeting of the Archbishop and his guests. And it was an amazing experience. It was full of joy, and children were dancing, and drums and singing, and you had like hundreds of people that would turn out to greet him. It was truly a remarkable experience. And then you kind of marched on the way to church singing, and that kind of reminds me of what this Palm Sunday kind of was based upon. And there is a kind of popular myth in the church that the entry into Jerusalem by Jesus was like a ticker tape parade in New York. It was, the city was vibrant, and it wasn't like that at all. And if you think about it, everybody, the Roman authorities, the soldiers at the corners, everybody was tense. This happened outside the city on the Mount of Olives. There's a little dusty pathway that comes into the city. So it would have been Jesus and a couple of hundred people that he would have gathered on his journey from Galilee down. We're going to the great festival in Jerusalem, the Passover. So these would have been people that would have joined the crowd. So it would have been maybe a couple of hundred people that would have created this alternative experience that most people in Jerusalem would not have been aware of, because the authorities would have been onto it. And you hear in the gospel that Brian read in the parish hall, the Pharisees are saying, Jesus, you got to tell your disciples to keep the alleluias down, keep the happiness down here. Shh, be quiet. Obviously, it would have been stopped if it had been in the city. So it's about these counter-cultural experiences that only a few people might have witnessed, but later on they become very significant to the movement. And you have that kind of remembering of the prophet Zechariah, "Rejoice, O people of Zion, shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey's colt." So the historical event would hardly have been noticed. And there's a matter of kind of business as usual going on, right? If you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't even notice that the history of salvation is happening right now, but it's business as usual. And within a week, this little troublemaker from Galilee, a couple of trials, the populace is appealed to, and he's done in, and it's over with. And we're all going back to work and back to normal, business as usual, right? So there's a quality of the kind of business as usual about this story. We know differently, but at the time, this was not obvious what was going on. This was just another troublemaker put to death, and the state had control again. And the conspiring between religious authorities and secular authorities to keep everything just fine. Just keep business as usual. And I think about that in our own lives, that we think, we just get on with our lives. But how is God working out the story of salvation in business as usual in our day? And as we enter into the story, to think about that and connect the story with our own lives. And finally, as we reread and retell this story to one another, Luke's gospel weaves together these different characters and forces that play out the story of human redemption and liberation. What does Jesus do with the religious rituals around, say, Passover? So what is he doing to this public festival of liberation? What is he doing to it that makes it different? And how does that affect the way we look at liturgy and public demonstration of witness in our world today? And the Passover at its core is about human liberation, right? It's the journey from oppression and bondage to liberation and freedom, right? That's what he's celebrating. And he's giving that celebration a whole new meaning in his own person. But again, they didn't get it. It's only after the effect. And so how are we living that in our lives? And there are moments, and the two major forces in this story is the state, the Roman state, and religion, the Jewish faith, and the ways in which these are seen to be benevolent. Part of the story, Pilate sets free Barabbas, who's a terrorist, appealing to the idea of the state being generous and being able to free people. And the centurion, right at the end of the story, the centurion, who's also an agent of the state, says this man was dealt with unjustly. So it's a very kind of mixed bag. And we think about the ways in which religion and state in our own world is playing out. What is it that is happening today that is in this story that we can pay attention to? So 3 things. A way in which we hold together the way in Roman imperial society, the way that people were honored, these great triumphal, if you were a general, you would receive a great triumphal entry after a victory. And the other side of that is the way in which the state shamed people, right? And on Good Friday, it's Jesus is shamed in public, carrying the lintel of his own cross. So the idea of how we honor and shame in our society, how do we do that, right? Then the second point, how is God active in the business as usual attitude that most of us have to the business of human liberation, suffering and redemption? Is that a message we can find in our very busy, crowded lives? And then finally, how is religion and the trappings of religion, and by that I mean story, ritual, liturgy, how is religion and the trappings of religion used by church and state to liberate or control? Is there a moment or a scene in this story that triggers an experience or memory of current daily reality for me as I enter Holy Week 2019?